The obvious choice is not rational. Hello and welcome to the 167th episode of the Sales Podcast. I'm Wes Schaefer, the Sales Whisperer, your host. Today we have Miss Evelyn Gosnell, and she is practically a mind reader. When you internalize and apply what she covers in this episode, you will see your marketing improve. You will see your sales improve. You will see your stress reduced, especially when you are creating content, when you are interacting even in person with prospects and clients. The things she gets into about people's behaviors and how to make people at least tip the odds in your favor that people will act the way you want them to act, you will appreciate what we cover. We get into things like pricing, decoy pricing, anchoring, red herring, when to use round numbers like $100, when to use specific numbers. You know, should it be $4,000 or should it be $3,986.14? There are specific reasons the way the mind works and interpret things that dictates how and why and when you should use different types of numbers for your pricing and things like that. So I've actually been delayed in producing this, honestly, because I've been reviewing the notes, re-listening to this, getting a couple of books that she mentioned, and digging into this myself. It's one of the great benefits of having a podcast, is getting insight, being able to pick somebody's brain, that's an expert in their industry. And as you may have heard already, I have implemented a new little bonus for my listeners, giving away over $100 worth of value in my sales success toolkit for listeners. All you have to do is leave a 5-star review on Stitcher or iTunes, and then text the word sales, SALES, to 96,000, and let me know that you did it. That'll also let me know who you are, and each week we will announce a winner. We'll pick from the list. So again, text the word sales to 96,000, and now on to the show. Evelyn Gosnell, all the way from San Diego. Welcome to the Sales Podcast. Are you ready for this?
Oh, I'm ready.
Oh, okay.
I was born ready.
Now, we have this on recording, so you have stated that you are ready, and you have agreed that you are who I just said you were. So, because you're a mind reader and psychologist genius, for our readers and our listeners who are not mind readers and brain geniuses, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself? And then I get to pick your brain for the next 30 minutes.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Evelyn Gosnell, and I'm the founder of Behaviorally. And basically, I help companies get inside their customers' heads to launch winning products and services faster and more profitably. So what does that mean? A lot of times as product managers or marketers or even salespeople, we're trying to trigger a certain behavior, right? We want people to buy or give us a referral or buy a higher price product. All of these are behaviors that we're trying to trigger. But the more we understand about the science of motivation and decision making, the better we can sort of nudge or steer or trigger those behaviors.
So you're a brain manipulator.
I wouldn't call it a brain manipulator. I would call it a behavioral scientist. And I think one thing that I would also add is that in a previous life, I was a product manager and a marketer. And so I've worked in that context, and I really understand. I've been in your shoes, I guess is the best way of calling it. So I can relate to how you're approaching things, your perspectives, your needs, your approach to problem solving, and saying, okay, well, that's great, but there might be some additional, we can refer to science in addition to what you're doing, and we can tweak your current strategies and maximize the results.
All right. So when I hear that, I get both excited and terribly terrified all at the same time. Because while the data and science and facts are fantastic, how can I keep them from being overwhelming? There's so many things. Because I've always seen, like, use a blue button, use a white border, use a yellow sans serif font, all these things. And I mean, the typical entrepreneur is like, good grief, I just need to sell something so I can put food on the table.
Yeah.
So how do we balance science and facts and data and constant iterations and testing with putting something up there that's pretty dang good and then kind of tweaking it?
I think that's a great question. And I would say, if anything, using behavioral science helps your process. It speeds it up, right? So we as entrepreneurs, we want to iterate. We want to have something launched quickly. But you also don't want to get into this endless cycle of throwing all these darts on the wall. Like, my customers said they wanted this, so I launched it. Why aren't they using it? Let me tweak it here. Oh, it's still not working. Let me tweak it here. It's still not working. Oh, what else? How else can I tweak this? And so what I see a lot is a lot of iterations, a lot of time and money being wasted when you can turn towards the science of behavior. And it's sort of like a shortcut. The other thing I would say is, I agree that overwhelm is a risk, but the key is to focus on, okay, what area of behavioral science or psychology is most relevant? I would say for a lot of entrepreneurs, I would focus on studying the psychology of incentives and what works. So let me give you a really simple example.
Okay.
What do marketers use a lot? Loyalty cards, right? Some kind of punch card. You see it a lot. Your neighborhood coffee store might have one where they say, hey, buy 7 coffees, get the 8th free, right? We see that kind of thing a lot.
Yep.
Well, the science behind that is you can actually, instead of just, if you've done the math and said, okay, it's profitable for me to give 7 at having people paid for 7 and then the 8th is free. Let me do that. But actually, if you do it where 10 are free, 10 are bought and then the 11th is free.
Okay.
But you pre-punch 3 of them. You say, hey, we're doing this awesome special because it's our anniversary, or it's, whatever fill in the blank event. And we're giving you a special offer where 3 are already pre-punched. So remember, the math here is the same. 7 coffees are paid for and the 8th is free because 3 are pre-punched, right?
Mm-hmm.
That punch card not only will be used by more customers, number one, but of the customers who use it, they'll come back to you more frequently. So that's something that's so simple. You haven't increased your cost in any way. All you've done is changed how you design your punch card. And that's using the psychology of incentives, because something's already started. You don't feel like, oh, I'm starting at 0. You're more motivated to use it. And so that's a perfect example, I think, of behavioral science providing a solution that's easy and pretty much effortless, right? There's no cost differential between the two, but the effect is there.
Well, I tell people if they buy 7, they can buy 8. Is that wrong? Did I get that wrong?
You certainly can.
All right, I'll try that. Well, cool. So, how does somebody know if they have a business or an industry or a niche that can benefit from something like this? Is it universal? Or somebody out there, it just wouldn't work. Like a dentist. Could I get 7 cleanings and the 8th one's free? Can it work in anything?
It can work in anything. I wouldn't say that particular example would work for the dentist. I would say the key here is focusing on what's the behavior that you most want to drive, right? So with a dentist, how can I get people to automatically schedule their next appointment, or the upsell, cross-sell? So I wouldn't say that the loyalty card is relevant for the dentist, but there's still the psychology of incentives could come into play. And so I would say for any business, yes, you're trying to drive certain behaviors. In most cases, you're trying to drive a sale. There's a lot of psychology behind the way you design and lay out your prices to trigger the right behavior.
Well, so I'm glad you brought up pricing, because we see that a lot. You need to have the $97 or $17.97 or, it's $21.99. How important is that? It's
very important. First of all, the research shows that it matters. You have to think about what type of product or service that you're selling. So if you're selling an emotional product, if it falls into something that's more likely to be an impulse buy, or it's a pleasurable, if you're selling chocolate or something like that, right? Or it's a massage at a spa type of thing. That's more of an emotional buy, versus a rational buy is, go ahead and sign up for this financial investment planning course. That's a rational purchase. So the emotional ones you can get away with. It's actually advisable to use round numbers, whereas on the rational side, you want to have a very specific dollar amount. And why is that? Because with a specific amount, including the cents added at the end, or if it's not a perfectly round number, it's $497, you're triggering someone to be in a more rational mindset versus a emotional one. The round one, it's a pleasurable experience for us to see and view a round number, so that falls more into the emotional category. But that's just one example. There's a lot of examples around pricing.
So what is a round number? Is 97 a round number or $100?
100 is a round number. Okay. Yeah. And the higher your prices go, the more important it is not to actually just have purely round numbers. So let's say, you're offering a consulting service for a certain client and you just say, okay, this is, $6,000 and it's a perfectly round number. There's more of a sense that that's an arbitrary number versus if it's, $5,790. It's because not all of this is thought out at a rational level. Of course, these reactions to pricing happen very, very quickly at a subconscious level. But one of the things that happens is we're more willing to pay for something if we feel like there's a lot of effort behind it. And the effort we have a sense that it's more accurate if it's that sort of random arbitrary number versus the sense, you just made up that round number. Is that really what your true costs are?
Yeah.
With a perfectly round number, if that makes sense.
It does. And, I've learned that as well. And a guy that I've followed for many years, Roy Williams, he has the Wizard of Ads, but he drove home that point that specifics sell. And we see it in things like in sales letters and sales pages, where they'll list all of the things that you get. But it's weird. It seems like they then turn around and violate it because it will be some round number, or it'll be $27,999.97. You're like, really, dude? Really? Is that really the price?
Yeah.
So they're almost violating their own recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. We see that a lot, and I think pricing is a really good area where we make the assumption that people are rational and we always act in our own interest. And really behavioral science has the opposite hypothesis, is that we are a lot of times irrational. But what I mean by that is, so traditional economic theory would say that as you increase a price, the demand would go down. Right, that's what the whole assumption is based on, but that's really not necessarily true depending on how you frame it. I work with clients frequently where I increase prices and increase demand concurrently. So there's a lot of, we won't get into all the details now, but you can do things with anchoring and what we call decoy pricing. So you but you create higher prices in order to position the product that you actually want to sell as a really good deal. The famous example in behavioral economics is with The Economist. They did that really well. They artificially created an offering that wasn't really viable, but it was just there to make the one that they really did want to sell as the clear and evident choice.
Did they make it like really expensive?
No, they did one offer where it was web and print.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're familiar with that one then.
Yeah. Well, but that one was viable, right? That's the one everybody went for.
Right, but no one was going to go for the print-only offer, so it was artificial.
Yeah, because the web and the print were the same price, right?
Right.
Because so the web was cheap, the print was more expensive, but the web and print were the same as the prints. People were like, well, heck, why don't I get both?
Yeah, exactly. And so you steered people, whereas if you just showed the two without what we call decoy price, the preferences shifted over to the other option.
So that's similar but different to what I'd learned. Another one was called a red herring. Mm-hmm. Do you tell me what you think that is, and I'll tell you if I have the same understanding. Or I could do it the other way around since you're the professor.
I'm not the professor, but I'll take that title for now, for the next 20 minutes. Well, one of the things we see at restaurants do this a lot, actually, right? So you're trying to sell, let's say, on average, all of your prices are around in the 20s to something, right? The grilled chicken is 20 some bucks. There's some shrimp dish that's 20 some bucks. And then you have, let's say, a grilled, some kind of rack of lamb at 30 some dollars, right? But it's not selling very well. Well, the reason for that is because when everything's in the 20s, that's what you're anchoring on that price. And so that's the scientific term. But the $30 some dollar option seems in relative sense high. So what you do is you create this $50 foie gras, something, something super fancy.
Yeah.
You add it to the menu. Not that you even tell your chefs, oh, please go ahead and buy a ton of this ingredient. You actually say, no, I'm not really expecting to sell, have some just in case. But what you would really do from an operational standpoint is say, please buy way more rack of lamb, because you're now going to nudge people in that direction.
Yes, that's that's the red herring, right? Is to put something really high out there so your mid-range thing doesn't seem so bad.
Yeah. You have to be careful with that strategy. It can backfire. So research shows that if you put it too high, it'll be transparent and you'll just get annoyance from that. So you don't want to make it ridiculous.
Right.
But within reason, it can be used effectively.
So you mentioned anchoring. And so that the red herring needs the anchoring to work, right?
The red herring is sort of the anchor that you're re-anchoring, basically. Yeah.
So is the anchor the high price, or is the anchor the mid price that you want people to go for?
The anchor is whatever you're comparing, whatever you're using as a comparison point for the product that you actually want to sell.
Gotcha.
So when you only have $20 and $30 options and you want to sell the $30 option, your $20 options are serving as the anchor, and that's why it's dragging the sales down.
Gotcha.
Whereas if you add the $50 item, that you've re-anchored it. You've created a new anchor.
So can people learn this? Are there books that they can read, or do they need to hire somebody like you to really get down and get things right?
Well, my bias is going to say, of course, they need to hire me.
Woo!
But a good start, a couple things. I would say that Dan Ariely is probably the most famous behavioral economist currently in this space, and his books are really easy and fun to read. So I would start with Predictably Irrational. Mm-hmm. I write a blog in this space on my website, behaviorally.com. And so that teaches you certain tips and strategies on how to integrate behavioral science into your product design.
Right.
And then Freakonomics also does a good job. They have a podcast as well, and they talk about these strategies.
Now, did you do some work with Dan?
I did. I have done. He's been an amazing mentor, and I do certain projects with his team as well. So we help various companies, from really large ones to just startups, in terms of how to better improve, design to trigger the behaviors that we want.
And so, can the local entrepreneur, the local chiropractor, the dentist, the restaurant, they can apply all of these predictably irrational nuggets to
Absolutely.
grow?
I think there's a whole level. Google's using behavioral science. Facebook is using behavioral science. So they're doing it at a very different scale and a different level of rigor, I would say, running a lot of experiments and doing it at a very complex scientific degree. But, if you're a small startup and you have to start somewhere, I would say, start with the basics, learn about the key areas of psychology. I would say incentives would probably be very relevant, pricing, and even something like defaults. I find defaults a really helpful tool because we have what's called a status quo bias. We keep with the current situation, and we also call it sort of following the path of least resistance. Really designing whether it's your website, let's say it's just your business's website, or it's your incentive plan or whatever it is, around keeping things really easy, that can be powerful as well.
What do you mean? What are you talking about there with with
defaults?
Incentives and defaults. I mean, incentives sound obvious, but they're not. I mean, you just brought up one about, punch 3, and do 10 instead of 7. I mean, that's an incentive, right? But it's not obvious what you just covered.
It's not obvious. Yeah, you would have to learn. And that's what I'm saying is the value of turning towards behavioral science. Because our intuition sometimes is wrong about these things. And that's the whole point of looking at, well, what does the research show? What in a real experiment, rather than you can't ask people, well, how would you behave in this situation? All of this research is based on how people
lie.
Actually behave. They don't necessarily lie. They just are bad at predicting their own behavior. So let me give you a couple more examples on incentives that are maybe counterintuitive that kind of show the power. So one of them is a study that was done by Uri Gnesi, who's actually he teaches here in San Diego at UCSD.
What's his name?
Uri Gnesi.
URI?
Yes. Gneezy. And he has a famous study that was with a daycare. And they were having, if you're running a daycare and you're trying to keep your costs down in terms of your operation, you're looking at, let's say you're paying your employees overtime if as soon as, pickup time is 5 o'clock, and so they're supposed to be done, by 5:15, 5:30, they should be able to go home. But all these parents keep showing up late, right? So all of a sudden you're having to pay more overtime for these employees and you're trying to fix this problem. So our natural, quote unquote, natural response would be like, oh, well, I'm going to just charge them a fee, right? Because our economic theory tells us that when you incur a cost on something, you're going to reduce the behavior. Mm-hmm. That's what we should assume, right? As they create a fee, the lateness should go down. But what happened in this situation, lateness actually increased. Mm-hmm. Why is that? Because so you've got kids, right? Let's say
people accuse me of having a daycare. I mean, I am so offended.
Well, that's a different problem. I can't help you with that one.
Just 7 kids. Come on.
But let's talk about, if you did have your kids at a daycare and you're yourself, finishing up work and you're rushing and, there's that light is orange. I'm just going to rush through it anyway, right? You're going to put pressure on yourself because you feel guilty because you're late, right? And these daycare keepers are having to stay later. They need to get home to their own families and you're making them late. You feel the sense of guilt, right? Because you have that social relationship with them. But by adding a fee, what you just did is you changed a social relationship to a transactional relationship. Mm-hmm. And so basically in that situation, many of the parents were like, oh, okay, well, I just have to pay $5 or whatever it was. Then fine, I'm going to go ahead and take my time. So, and here's the interesting part of that study. So they realized, okay, whoops, that didn't really work. So let's fix it and let's go back. Well, even after that, they were not able to reduce the amount of lateness because the challenge is once you take a social relationship and you redefine it as transactional, there's no going back. Yep. So that's another pretty famous example, I would say, of how incentives can be counterintuitive.
So what should they have done?
If you are going to charge a fee, fees would work. They just need to be high enough. There's a lot of other things that you could do. They were already feeling guilt. And so you could play to that, sort of emphasize the emotion of that. You could use, if you want, shame, which would be posting the names. I mean, I wouldn't recommend this. I'm just saying, here's things that could work.
What about hanging one of the kids by their suspenders, from a light post over the street? Is that too extreme?
Maybe just a tad bit.
Oh, okay. I'm just trying to think out loud here. Okay. I never did that with my kids, though, just if anybody's wondering. But, I did Google it once.
On the record.
But purely, I was just Googling it for a comedy. But, yeah, I didn't do that. So, yeah, it's interesting. So they shifted it from a social to a transactional. Yeah. And all bets are off after that, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Another one of Dan's famous experiments with that is getting people to do a task. It was a pretty tedious task. I don't remember what it was in the experiment, but something really boring like, translate these CAPTCHAs, and people could do it for as long as they like. And he had different conditions where he was either paying them with money or with candy, and people would go much longer for candy, even though the value was lower than for money. So again, think about that takeaway from
Is
a
that
business.
because it felt more like a favor to them, or initially did it longer?
Well, I think part of it is that you think you don't translate the value of the candy. We're not counter again to what an economist would say. We don't immediately calculate, okay, this is the value of the candy. Therefore, this candy must have cost 23 cents. Therefore, what I'm doing is worth 23. We don't do all of that. We think of, someone's paying me 23 cents to do this. That makes me a really cheap person, right? You're redefining it versus a candy is like, that's a nice treat. Cool. Nice. But again, the takeaway here for me, and what I think is for business owners is you got to think about how you're allocating your costs, not only for your employees, but also for your customers. Is there a way to design an incentive program? Do you always have to incur cost? We have way, way too quick of an assumption. Oh yeah, I'll give a discount, or I'll give them this reward. There's a lot of psychology of incentives and rewards. I like to use lotteries a lot because we, as humans, are overly optimistic, and we very much overestimate our chances at winning something. Mm-hmm. So if you're going to, have some sort of reward that's high, let's say, you want to give someone an iPad, or even not an iPad, an iPod. Don't have to go giving one, but you can give a chance. Every time you do this behavior, every referral counts as a chance to win this iPod, is a much better incentive than giving everybody some dollar amount, even if your total math adds up to be the same.
I wondered about those. I'm like, personally, I don't like them. Like when I see that, I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to win. But am I the oddball in thinking that way?
It depends on what the scale is. I mean, I would say if again, I was trying to answer the question in terms of you're a local entrepreneur, and if you have a relatively small set of clients, that can work well. Okay. If you're, Amazon, and you think, okay, I'm one of Amazon's customers, and so I have a chance in millions to get this, then that's really different. I wouldn't recommend that for them.
Gotcha. So, man, most of the people that I speak with, and this is, going back at least 9 years, and I started this way, in undervaluing, underpricing our offering. Mm-hmm. How can somebody quickly determine where they should price their products and services? Because, an extreme example that I give people is, let's say you have a $1,000 offering, and you get on average 100 clients, and so that's $100,000. Let's say over the course of a year. Mm-hmm. And I tell people, all right, if you double your price to $2,000 and get half as many customers, 50, you're still at $100,000. But doing just straight line math, right, all things being the same, you should have twice as much free time because you're servicing half as many people and making just as much money. But how can people find that tipping point, that happy medium, where they can charge the absolute max in service and still maximize their income before they start to, shoot themselves in the foot?
I think that's a challenging question. And I think in terms of the approach that I would take or the recommendation I would make is that you want to be really careful and think smartly about how you're positioning yourself. What is this offer and what's the value of it? And, I think that's the area where the greater you can make that. So again, going back to emotional or rational. In this space, I don't know how much of an emotional purchase you can make it, but if you can, it's a lot easier to sell an emotional product than a rational one, right? Or an emotional service than a rational one.
Well, can we make a rational purchase emotional?
Yes, you can use certain things. You can use, there's a term called loss aversion. So the idea of losing something is more powerful to us than the idea of potentially gaining that exact same thing.
Right.
So you can frame that, use that in your framing.
Okay. So let's say, I'm working on relaunching my live sales training program. So I'm renaming it, and it's called Make Every Sale. Mm-hmm. And so how would I position that? Would I position that as stop losing the sale?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, stop losing the sales that keep you awake at night, and but like the name is positive, right? Make every sale. Should I change it to stop losing
like
sales?
Name. Okay, yeah. So that's another really good point. So loss aversion, and this is why when you were asking the question, how can I start on this? And I'm not that familiar. The basics are always available to everyone. You can go and read these books. The value of hiring someone like me is I know a lot of the nuance and the detail. So with loss aversion works really well as an initial strategy to gain a new customer or to create that initial first behavior. You don't want loss aversion as a permanent part of all of your messaging, because what happens is it gets overly negative and people they don't want that to experience that negative emotion around engaging with you or your product all the time. Okay. So it's not good as a repeat sort of continuous strategy. It's good as a one-time, like get them in. It works very effectively for that, but I don't recommend it for longer term.
So the chiropractor would be, stop your back pain. But then after that, it's like live a healthier lifestyle.
Yeah. And then again, using emotion, I would say things like, how can we frame this? Not just lifestyle, right? Like live longer for your kids, your family, like use as many of those triggers as you can.
What if my kids are really getting on my nerves? And maybe I don't want to live that long for them. I don't know.
Then again, you got a different problem. I don't know if I can solve that.
Dang. All right. Did I say that out loud? Bartender. Oh. All right. So loss aversion works well as an initial strategy. Okay. Very nice. I never really thought of it that way. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Let's wrap this up with something powerful. I mean, what are some, like a last minute tip or something? Imagine, our listeners, they're driving, they're maybe at the gym, they're on the treadmill, out for a jog, they're mountain biking, but what if they're going to stop? They're going to pull the car over, or when they get to the next place, when they get off the treadmill, what can they do? What should they do? What should they put into practice, or read, or put into practice right now to make a difference in their business after listening to you?
Okay. So I would say the most important thing is to think about the behavior that you most want, and not something generic like, let's say it's your website. Oh, I want user engagement. No, I don't want something generic like that. I say I want users to click on this button and sign up for this webinar, or I want them to buy this product, or I want them to do this. Think about the behavior that you most want, number one. And number two, make it as easy as possible to get that desired behavior. So let me give you, again, another example. I'm all about using the examples.
Sure.
I mentioned defaults before. There's a famous study here that was done on pizzas, and defaulting either in one version of the experiment, some people just started with a cheese pizza and they could add all of their toppings. Yep. And another one, it had everything added and all they had to do was remove, right? Okay. So if you're the guy selling pizzas, which one do you want? You want it to be the easiest one, right? You want to sell the most toppings. Mm-hmm. So what was the difference in those two totally different group of people who saw these two different experiences? The two toppings, the 0 toppings and add version, They had a total of 2 toppings for a price of $19. When they started with everything on there and they had to remove, they had on average 8 toppings for a total of $25. Mm. So that's just a classic example of making what you want a really, really easy behavior. And I'm talking be really brutal with yourself. Look at, in my sales funnel, are there 5 steps? What are the things that I'm asking my client to do? How can I make 5 steps 4? Can I make it 3? Can I make it 2? Yep. Can I make every step of the way as seamless and easy as possible to trigger the behavior that I want?
Well, that's a great example. Because, like, when I go out, like, especially with the family, whatever, I mean, my wife is super frugal, and I can be cheap. Feeding family of 9, it's like, you know what? Those toppings add up. You kids can all drink water. Because, I mean, when you buy 9 Cokes at $3 a piece, that's $27 worth of sugar water.
I don't envy that.
So I'm like, drink water. But more than I hate wasting money, I hate wasting time. So that's why my wife always goes in order. Like I'll drop her off and I'll go park because she will sit there and pick that menu apart and I won't do it. Right? So if I walked in and said, hey, $25 get everything, I'm like, great. Because I don't like just cheese pizza. Right? Mm-hmm. And I do like pretty much everything. I can pick off one or two things, but I'd rather spend more money, get everything and be done than have to pick and choose. Right? Or have everybody, what do you want? What do you want? So I value my time more than anything. So, I mean, that's a great example. But that applies to any business, doesn't it? A dentist can upsell or start with bigger packages. A chiropractor, anybody, IT services company, anybody can start.
Absolutely. You want to make the choice really easy. I think we underestimate the value. We think, my customer, let them choose what they want. And so we take them to the page and we have 3 different options or 5 different options. And by the way, the more options you have, the worse it is.
Right.
The more you're making them think, the harder it is for them. And the problem is, what happens a lot then is instead of just wasting time on deliberating an option, a lot of times you just lose them entirely because it's cognitively difficult to make a choice. You just lose them entirely. So a simple example of how do you make their choice easier, you label one of the options as bestseller if it's true.
Yep.
If it's not true, you can label it as recommended or things. There are things like that. You can highlight it. You can put it in the middle and make it stand out more. Yep. There's all kinds of tactics, but you want to make that choice easy. And that's what I mean by that. We're using defaults, reducing the number of steps, making it seem like this is the obvious choice that everyone else is doing. You heard my talk earlier on social proof and how we follow the behavior of others. Mm-hmm. So you should use that to your advantage.
Yeah, we were at our neighbors. Their kids work at this Bahama Bucks. It's like a shaved ice kind of thing, and it's a cool little place. And we went to their first grand opening in the city next to ours a few months ago. And then they just opened one right around the corner. So these kids were brought over to help open that one. So we got the VIP again. So we get to go and get a free dessert, whatever. But their menu is literally 3 flat screen TVs. And it's like, wow. It's like the proverbial Chinese menu, it's just on and on and on and on. And my wife even said, this is too many choices. And, because it's this VIP thing, right? And it's free. We stood in line for a good 15 minutes, just trying to get up there. And, so we're talking with the owner, blah, blah, blah. But we finally get up there and my wife's ordering for all these kids. And my second oldest daughter was there. She's 13. And after all this time waiting, she could have read the whole thing. She could have memorized the whole thing, but it was so overwhelming. She's like, what should I get? Mm-hmm. I'm like, exactly. Are you kidding me? Yep. It's like you had 15 minutes to read 3 big menus, but it was too much.
It was.
And they could scale that thing back by 60 or 75% and probably make more money, get more people through there and have less cost of goods. But the store seems to be doing okay, but good grief.
But see that in that example, you're already there. So you're already sort of captive audience. You're going to buy something.
Right.
But the thing is, for so many businesses or entrepreneurs or whatever, they don't have to buy. They might just be passing by your website. And so when you present them with too many choices, guess what happens? Instead of sitting there and wasting 10 minutes figuring it out, bye-bye, they're gone. You just lost them. So that's, I would say, even more important. When you don't have that sort of captive audience, all the more reason to make the choice really easy.
Yeah. I hear you. Very nice. All right. Evelyn Gosnell. Gosnell. But your website is behaviorly.com, correct?
Correct.
And they can go there and learn more about you. You got some good free reports or goodies to help them?
I have a blog with a lot of updates on the latest behavioral science and how to integrate it into your product and your marketing and your sales strategy.
Right. Very nice. And I heard you speak a couple months ago, and you got the goods. That's why you're on the Sales Podcast.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
Take care.
Told you that was good stuff, didn't I? And, she mentioned the book, by Dan Irely, Predictably Irrational. So I was pretty impressed that she's actually done work with this guy. I'd read his book years ago. And, people are not rational. Raise your prices and still increase demand. Who would have thunk it? We get into lotteries, how you position yourself. And like I said, go back and listen to this, take some notes, get the book she mentioned, especially get Dan Irely's book and read through that. In a nutshell, it just says if you give too many choices to your prospects, you're hurting yourself and you're hurting them. Help people make a decision. And it's not always logical or rational how to go about doing that. One thing I always tell my clients is that you are not your client. You have to take kind of this out-of-body experience and look at them and think, what do they need? Don't think, what do you need? Or how would you buy something? Or how would you analyze something? You need to look at how they would, because as salespeople, we need to adjust how we sell, right, to match how the prospect buys. We can't force them to buy in a way that we want them to buy. That's the nuance. That's the subtlety. That's the dance, the courtship that is selling. So go back, like I said, listen to this, good information. And if you want a little assistance, I have a new free 7-day mini course on how to control every sale, how to take control, how to automate it, and help bring people to you that are ready, willing, and able to buy. It's right on the homepage of the Sales Whisperer. And like I said, it's a free 7-day mini course packed with content. It's the biggest piece of information in one sequence I've ever given away for free. So check that out. Again, it's on the homepage of thesaleswhisperer.com. And thanks for listening. And as always, remember to sell different.